Hi, this is David Gelb, the director of Jiro Dreams of Sushi, and I'm here with Brandon Driscoll-Luttringer, the editor of the film.
Hello.
And we're going to talk a little bit about the making of the film and a bit about our intentions in the process of making it and some of the lessons that we've learned. So, at first, my plan was to make a film about a number of different sushi chefs and kind of to travel around and just eat the best sushi in the world and film the stories of these chefs. But after I ate at Tsukiyabashi Jiro, Jiro's restaurant, I realized that this is really kind of, this man is a living legend, and everything that I wanted to convey about sushi would best be conveyed through his perspective. He's a true genius. So this song is the first track of the movie. Is a song by Tchaikovsky that I'm really into. And actually, my great uncle Jascha Heifetz is the solo violinist on this, so I thought it was kind of appropriate to keep in the film. And then Brandon, who's an incredible editor who edited maybe 100 music videos or so, did a great job with his opening montage. This is Joel Robuchon, who's, you know, considered to be the greatest chef of modern times. He's a huge fan of Jiro's. So Jiro's restaurant is in a subway station, which is kind of counterintuitive when you think about, you know, the prestige of the restaurant, but not everything is as it appears. This is your first glimpse of the Otoro, the fattiest and most delicious of the tuna.
I
think this was one of the most interesting decisions that we made was saying put Jiro right up front and center with his message. It made him, you know, it's almost how you feel going in as a customer. You understand his message, but he doesn't show any sign of familiarity. It's very straightforward and to the point. I felt like that was a really great introduction, and that's why we use this here.
And initially, my direction, which was totally wrong, was to keep Jiro at a distance from the viewer and try to make it so he actually didn't, in the first cut, he didn't actually say anything until like the beginning of the second act, which we realized was a huge mistake. And then we did the exact opposite of what our initial intention was, which was much better. Now, Mr. Yamamoto here is basically what is actually the real reason that this movie was made. You know, my father introduced me to him, and you know, he's just an incredibly poetic food writer and, you know, an old friend of Jiro's, and he kind of was taking me to a number of different restaurants in Japan, knowing that ultimately I would make the film about Jiro, and he kind of let me figure that out on my own. So he was sort of like a spirit guide through this entire film, and he's just an incredible person and just such a great writer. And you know, you see his words in the film, the way he speaks about sushi, is such love for it and such love for the craft. It's really kind of a beautiful thing.
I guess that's one of the most interesting things you did when you were there filming was you actually had Yamamoto ask some of your questions to Jiro instead of yourself or the translator. Since they have such a great relationship, you were able to get true, familiar answers from Jiro instead of answers that he would give to a translator or someone who he didn't know. He was giving them to Yamamoto, which gave him a great familiarity, and the audience was able to see, you know, his actual character because he was answering to a friend instead of a stranger.
Right. Although initially in the film you won't necessarily see that kind of comfort. It's actually one of my favorite parts of the film right now.
Right. This look.
Jiro's so stoic and, you know.
Everyone thinks this scene is scripted because he asks the most perfect questions at the most perfect points. You think he's gonna leave, but he comes back and asks one more question.
Yeah. He basically explains like how the restaurant operates, and I was just so lucky to I just happened to be filming right when he walked in, and it became one of the most important scenes in the movie. He just really breaks down, how do you get a reservation here?
all in one take.
Yeah.
It's always been in every cut of the film.
Yeah, what do you serve? Yeah, and basically it was just an issue of finding the perfect placement to. But we realized it was very early in the film because he kind of just breaks down everything, and as you see right here, 30,000 yen is about right now in 2011. It's about $350 or so. But that'll change. We didn't put the translation of the dollars because we didn't want to date the movie. Who knows where the dollar's going?
他のものっていうのはないです。握り一通りだけしかやってないです。はい。つまみはやってないです。はい、そうです。はい、はい、よろしくお願いします。
I always wondered after this exchange, do you think that he called and made a reservation and came to the restaurant? I don't know.
15分ぐらいで食べちゃうから15分で3万円なんて店この世の中にないでしょ。でも食べる人
The first time I went to Jiro's, my meal was so fast because I was so nervous, because he says that you have to eat it as soon as he puts the sushi down. And so you do that, and then you're out of there in like 15 minutes. You're like, what just happened? You're just in a state of shock. It's so delicious, and it's such a... Just the sound of the fountain, and, it's just a really beautiful experience.
I always like this scene because in the whole process of editing the film, I always felt like these guys had something that was so much more than a natural gift. It was, things that they weren't born with, things that they had worked for so long. It's true in any field, really, that there is some bit of natural talent that needs to come from within you. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that helps, that they say helps define your craft and your calling.
Right. You need to have the taste to follow what, the taste, so you're aiming your work at something, but it requires, hard work and diligence
And
also.
Yoshi, it's very much a reflection of his father in those statements.
One of my favorite things about shooting in Japan is that nobody ever looks at the camera. They're too polite because they know that I'm filming something, so they're not going to ruin my take. When I would shoot documentaries in the United States, everybody would be giving devil horns at the camera and stuff. But in Japan, people are very polite when you're shooting. It's kind of amazing.
It's amazing with the B-roll. It's true. Very rarely was anyone on the street ever looking at the camera.
Mm-hmm. One of the first things I was told to do is whenever I see Jiro or meet anybody, give a very strong "Ohayo gozaimasu." I don't speak many words. I speak a little bit of Japanese, but the phrases that I do know, I speak with great confidence. And I think that Jiro, appreciates the effort. That's actually one of my favorite things is when he throws the chopsticks on the thing.
Right. When David first started shooting, he started using a very small Canon camera, an SLR, worked his way up to the red, which I believe this is the red shot.
This is the red, yeah.
But in the beginning, he was very careful to be as quiet as possible about shooting, and then once they became comfortable, he was able to work his way up to a bigger camera.
And not just being quiet, but also just being small and staying out of the way, because it's a very small space, and I'm 6 feet tall, so I was always almost knocking things over. And I also want to acknowledge my assistants out there, Yukako Inoue and Shino Nakamura, who were my translators and my assistants, and they were absolutely invaluable, and they were basically just making sure that I didn't destroy anything as I was trying to get the perfect shots and move around.
It's kind of foreshadowing Yoshi's importance in the restaurant, which is kind of unknown at this point in the film.
I once asked Yoshikazu if he ever disagrees with his father about the taste of things, and he said absolutely not. And as you see in this scene, that they agree also.
Right. I love the metaphor of the notepad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's their reservation book, and that basically determines, it determines what kind of fish, how much fish they're getting, and it determines, just basically the pace of the day.
それから節制する。で常に明日のことを考えてる。
Now, we use a lot of music by Philip Glass in this movie, and also we use music inspired by Philip Glass. And I think that, there are a few reasons for that. And I guess the foremost reason is that Philip Glass's music itself, well, first of all, Jiro is a master. And so we were trying to make all the formal elements of the film as elevated as possible. Just like he elevates his craft, we're trying to elevate our craft to meet him so that the film feels like it's from his perspective. So that's why we use only music from, great composers like, Bach and Mozart and Philip Glass. And specifically, Philip Glass is incredible for this because, as you'll see later in the film, he talks about how the repetition of basically what they're trying to do, every day they do the exact same thing, but they're always looking for that one little bit of improvement.
Elevation.
To just reach one step higher, but always keeping the baseline the same so that they know that they are improving. Because if things are changing from day to day, then they wouldn't be able to tell, the difference. So Philip Glass's music also is kind of repetitive, but always elevating. So the key changes and the music, it elevates itself, and it's just kind of a metaphor for what Jiro is doing.
昔と今と違うって30年前と今と違うっていうのはタバコを吸わなくなったっていうだけで、あとは全部同じだと思います。
So this is our introduction to Mizutani, who is another 3-star sushi chef and a former apprentice of Jiro's. Mizutani's been working with Jiro for many, many years. He's become a celebrated sushi chef in his own right. And he was just great. He was incredibly candid about both Jiro and Yoshikazu. And I love the way that he describes Jiro's work ethic and about how he would never miss a day.
That's something we were really lucky with, was having both him and Yamamoto be just as artistic with their crafts as they are with their words. I mean, these two are basically the narrators in our film. We were very lucky in the editing process to find that they said so much candid information about them that we were able to bring them in at various points and explain so much about the characters in a very comfortable way.
Yeah, and the way that he kind of challenges Yoshikazu almost in his commentary, saying, Yoshikazu should take over. And these are the things that actually really helped us put the story together. It was because of how candid he was and how honest he was. And actually, a lot of people would say that's actually very un-Japanese to be so open. But some people have told me that maybe it's because I'm a foreigner that they felt a little bit more relaxed and were able to, talk a little bit more freely than they might have to a Japanese person.
それが2つあるんですね。ちょっときっかけみたいな。70の時倒れた時にこれ続けられるかなっていうのもありましたよね。
それはいくつぐらいだったんですか。
19からです。
でもあんまり気にならなかったでしょ最初。
I love Yoshikazu. Really, he's kind of the hero of the movie. He actually is the reluctant hero. As you can see, he didn't want to do it at first, and you'll see more about that later.
I always considered him to be the actual protagonist.
Oh, sure.
Whereas Jiro is constant.
Yeah. I love his concentration here, looking back, and he just really thinks it through and then comes to the decision.
それさっきやったんだけども、これ去年から予約受けてるんで、一番過ぎちゃ気の毒かなと思って。なるべくもうこういう設定、それで理解やるようにする。それでないとね、目が届きませんとね、ダメです。それと普通みんなやってて気が付かないことを自分が長年やってると気が付くから、それをこうやるとかあれやるとかこれをやらなきゃダメだとかっていうことは言えますから。あれはもう僕がいる方が一番大変でしたよ。だって60まででしょ。そんなに驚いたことするような奇抜なことをする人じゃないんですよ、あの方。だからそういうあれはもうただもう黙々と毎日。
That was one of the most interesting things about the editing process, was finding moments where Jiro was doing much, because literally what he does a lot of the time is stand around and just observe. the restaurant and look for the most subtle details of things that are out of place. The sign, for example, which he just moved about 6 inches or 8 inches over.
You know what's funny is that sometimes I would move things slightly just to like get a certain shot, and then he would come and correct them.
Exactly.
Because like I think I'd moved the sign. I'd either moved the sign or I'd moved something else that we had not included. But you know, and here he comes. You know, just like repeating the, just observing and making sure that they're doing it right. It's a combination of just maintaining the quality and then also just training them. This is actually an interesting thing about how, you know, every fish has a certain way that you have to prepare it and you have to age it. The big misconception about sushi is that you want the freshest fish straight out of the ocean. But actually, you know, tuna, for example, depending on the weight of the tuna, as they describe, you need to age it and let it rest for a certain amount of time in order for it to reach its peak of flavor. And that just comes from years and years of experience to know exactly when the perfect moment to serve it is. So they wouldn't serve this tuna. They're preparing this, but they're not going to serve this tuna at least for a few days.
And I always thought this was a great scene for especially Western cultures to see, because as they describe, it's all, you know, in Western culture, it's all about the fatty tuna.
Everybody wants the tuna.
And that was never the traditional case in Japan, and it's kind of something that echoed back there and all across the world. The need for the fattiest parts of the tuna became the most coveted.
Because, you know, it's hard to get tuna that has that beautiful tuna flavor. Also, just notice here we did a little focus job to make it look like things are kind of miniature. But yeah, you know, Jiro really insists that if you have a great piece of tuna, you know, the red meat, you know, really captures the flavor of it. But the tastes have changed. One of my favorite things about Japanese culture is the specialization. So every vendor is incredibly focused in mastering a very specific thing. And then when you have all these masters coming together through Jiro, basically is sort of like taking the best of all of these, you know, specific specialists and synthesizing them into a single, you know, bite or a series of bites. It's really kind of, it's really amazing.
Yeah, and Jiro and Yoshi couldn't have emphasized that more in the footage. Every other conversation that I looked at, they were talking constantly about the vendors, and they relied on professionals in each of their fields, the best of those vendors, to supply them with the best fish so that they could do what they do best, which was make it into sushi. And when you look at, you know, this complete meal, you really see so many people collaborating in a process. But when you're in a restaurant, you don't think about those kind of things.
Again, you'll notice that nobody ever looks at the camera, which is incredible.
This is an interesting idea. Originally, we had maps here and trying to show the world, but I thought this was a really cool way to do it instead, overlaying people.
I borrowed this from the movie Fog of War. It's a huge influence on this film, but I love the combination of slow motion and fast motion.
それでやっぱりミシュランの調査員はやっぱりまずクオリティを見る、それからオリジナリティを見る、それからいつも同じ状態か、それを軽々クリアしてるっていうお店だと思いますね。でその三つ星っていうのは意味はそのお店にわざわざ食べに行くだけの旅をする値打ちがあるっていうそういうことなんで、で二郎さんのお店が三つ星になってみんな不思議があった。わずか10席、お手洗いも外にあるね、こんなお店は世界中の三つ星で一軒もないんですね。でもミシュランの調査員の人は何度食べても素晴らしい、三つ星をつけようがね、それ以外にこう評価しようがないって言ってがっかりしたことが未だかつて一度もない。こんなことは奇跡
I think in an earlier cut we actually made the Michelin a little bit more prominent, but then we realized that, you know, we'll let the audience decide for themselves and then also add in that Michelin thing. This is actually one of my favorite parts. I wish that everybody could have been there because it's just sort of, the idea was sort of to show the kind of the, you know, traditional stoicism. Even when he goes up on an escalator, you know, his posture is perfect. Whenever he walks, he just thinks, you know, it's effortless, but, you know, he just does everything with his kind of perfection. And then suddenly this blaring, you know, 20th century, 21st century music, you know,
video game or something.
Yeah. That's the kind of the culture clash. It was interesting.
店の作りが違うのは僕が右利きなのとあと親さんが左利きなのですから その位置が全く逆になるんですね。こっちは銀座ですね。
Yeah, so this is amazing. The idea that the restaurants are exactly the same.
Yeah.
I was blown away by that when I found out.
Yeah. But actually, I was thinking about this earlier because, Jiro is left-handed, so his restaurant is set up that way. And then Takashi is right-handed. But Yoshikazu, who will, who works at Jiro's, is going to be taking over the restaurant, is right-handed.
You're right.
So I wonder if that's going to affect anything. I don't know. I don't think so.
You're right. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Poor Yoshikazu.
This is always a cool shot because the assistant looks so nervous over there.
だって親父さんに六本木行くときにお前もう帰ってくるとこがないんだからなって言われて。
Love Jiro's laughter about that one.
Oh, yeah.
だからそれはもうね、ダメでしたって帰るわけにいかないですから。
いや独立するときはそのくらいでないと。
I would love to see Jiro's parenting book. I guess you get a glimpse of it here. But he really, he trains his children to be independent.
あれなって言ったときに独立しなさいとは言わないんだよ。独立しても絶対できると思うから行って頑張ってということを言う。その代わり失敗したらこっちは帰ってこられない、自分でどっか職人探していくんだぞという。それはそれ言うとまたっていうかもなんだけど。
In the beginning, I thought that, and I think David would agree with this, that the movie was going to be a lot about sushi. And once we had these interviews and we were able to look at the footage, we realized how much depth to Jiro, how much depth there was to his character, and how much he had been through, and how much history, and how many lessons he had to teach everyone, and his unique perspective that is uncompromising compared to so many people in the world who give up easily when exactly nowadays parents tell their children they can come home. I mean, that mentality is just so poetic and strong and rare. Especially in my culture, being in America, everyone tells their children to come home if they have a problem, and he never had that option. And it's a very unique view for me, and I felt like it was as much of a part of his sushi as the fish itself.
We placed this scene here because, after he says such, kind of harsh words about the youth, we have to reveal, where is this coming from? And Jiro definitely did not have an easy time growing up. He was just a child when, there's a Great Depression in Japan and a lot of, incredible economic difficulty and strife. And then, when he was just a young man, he had to go off and, and serve in World War II for the Japanese military.
来た当時に死んだというのを聞いてるから、だけど俺は葬式にも来てないし、7つまで一緒、7歳まで一緒、あとは知らない。あとは独立を俺が。
Yeah, kind of an amazing thing is, he didn't have a family, like he didn't have a father who was there for them. And, there are kind of two ways that you can go two directions you can go after that. You can either, maybe you're going to repeat the process and not be a good father yourself, or as sort of almost like a backlash to that, you're going to really make sure that your kids are okay because you don't want your kids to grow up in that hard way that you did. And, as tough a dad as he was, he really kind of created a beautiful life for, an elegant life for his kids as well.
He created a family that he never had.
Yeah, he created the family, exactly. And so I think that's really kind of moving. I love this story.
で振ってやったんですよ。そしたらペッて開けたらピヨーって出ちゃってさ、彼がものすごい怒ったんですよ。何ヶ月も食べて、それ半分以下になっちゃったら出ちゃった全部出ちゃったんですよね。それで
I love that Yoshikazu is the older brother, but he's afraid of the wrath of his younger brother. He still feels guilty. Our producer, Kevin Iwashina, always says, oh, that's very Japanese to feel guilty. There are a couple of specific moments that he always cracks up. You can always hear him in the theater, like shrieking with laughter at certain points.
本当に大体もう朝5時半に起きて行っちゃうし、夜はもう10時頃だけ帰らないからもう寝てるから。
It's just so ironic that Jiro, who rarely ever was around when his children were being raised, has one of the closest families that I've ever seen. I mean, they work together constantly.
Right. Well, they weren't so close when they were little, but, I wonder if, maybe the reason that they became sushi chefs was so that they could become more of a part of their father's life.
Well, as I think Jiro says in a little bit, they wanted to go to college, but I convinced them otherwise. I convinced them to do otherwise. It's my opinion that he wanted to have that, this legacy and the sense of family and this, because as he says about his sushi, it's very much about mastering the art. And I feel like if he spent his whole life doing that, he started to realize maybe at a point that he wants to pass this tradition on, and his family is the best way to do that. And maybe he didn't have that, but now he has the opportunity.
Yeah, and that's the thing about, Japanese culture. It's a very kind of dynastic society where, the oldest son, kind of takes over the business and, trains in the craft of his father. And it's kind of true of craftsmen in Japan. So there are a couple of things in this about kind of the story of the family that really kind of resonated with me, because I have a younger brother, so I understand kind of the brotherly dynamic. And then also, my father he's the manager of the Metropolitan Opera and has done all kinds of amazing things. And so I kind of, in a sense, I kind of feel what it's like for Yoshikazu to be, in the shadow of his father. But at the same time, Jiro is incredibly supportive of Yoshikazu, just as my father is of me. So, I'm grateful at the same time. Now, this bonito is absolutely incredible tasting. It's amazing. It has and he's using specific, stuff to, it's all incredibly deliberate and incredibly delicious.
It looks beautiful too.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Brandon has not eaten the sushi yet.
This is true, and I am probably the single person on this earth who should get there as soon as possible.
He's seen it more than anyone else.
I've stared at it for months.
So we're gonna take him there.
David has taunted me with the fact that he ate every single piece of sushi that is in this film.
But fortunately, there are some chefs in the United States who do have this kind of mentality, and so he's gotten kind of a glimpse at, what it could be like. But we're gonna take him to Japan.
This is what we always call the genius montage. It shows Jiro deep in thought, talking about his dreams and his passion for creativity within the art form of creating sushi and making new dishes. And this is one of our favorite shots right here. I love the reflection.
その前までジローさんの時エビはどういうふうに？
やっぱり同じ朝茹でちゃって冷凍の中入れたって冷凍庫から出してきてくれやって。
I don't normally like shrimp that much in sushi restaurants, but his shrimp is amazing. One of my, hopes is that sushi chefs in the United States will watch this and just kind of take a cue from Jiro.
But who wants to massage an octopus for 45
yeah,
50 minutes?
That's one of the problems in the United States, because it's also a problem in Japan too, but especially in the United States, you can't get assistants who are so patient and willing to, go through this, because, you work there, you don't get paid that much, you spend more time with, the staff at the restaurant than you do with your family. You're there all the time, lunch and dinner every day except for Sunday. And the amount of work that goes into preparing that piece of sushi is just incredible, and people just don't appreciate that. Hope this is a window into that.
This is always one of my favorite shots. This
squid.
The squid ink, yeah. This next shot coming up is just gorgeous. Look like pearls. As they're talking about money, I always thought we don't care about money, and this is money. That's money right there.
Yeah, the reward is the craft.
This is one of the first moments you get to really see Jiro with his hands.
Jiro in the zone,
Crafting it with his delicate hands. It's so rhythmic, and it's just been refined after so many years. It's really like his nature to move like that.
かんないけど、じゃあこの頂上はどこかっていうと分かんないわけですよ。
So this is what he's done every single day. You know, in fact, I think we asked him, you know, how many pieces of sushi do you think you've made? And we did, I think we did the math or something, and it was like, it was over a million pieces.
Well over a million.
I mean, it kind of boggles the mind to think about.
I mean, it's 10 people, how many times a day?
完璧だとは思っていないからね。
I don't know, you know, they serve up to 30 people a day
So 30 people a day, 20 pieces each,
for like 60 or something.
and 365 days a year. It never takes a day off, really.
Yeah.
So you can do the math.
Yeah. Minus 52 Saturdays, or Sundays, rather. So this is actually something that I wish that a lot of sushi chefs did more often, is to paint the sushi with this, use the brush to put the correct amount of soy sauce on, because I see so many people are drenching the rice in the soy sauce, and really it's just the fish side is supposed to get a little bit of soy sauce on it. And, you know, he makes everything perfectly so it's perfectly balanced, so he wouldn't leave it to a customer to ruin the piece of sushi by applying the soy sauce in the wrong way.
でも上っていうふうに考えて現在まで来ています。だから今85になって
This is kind of the end of his opus, so to speak, in the beginning of Act 2, when we present the idea that although Jiro is the best, he is 85 years old, and there will need to be a legacy to follow.
There needs to be a new generation. So we kind of set up the beauty of it, and we kind of set up the stakes of it, and then now we're going to present the challenges.
And that was something that was very difficult, by the way. I mean, just going and shooting Jiro, knowing that he's the best sushi chef in the world, or, you know, arguably. You know, we had all this footage of beautiful sushi and a lot of interviews, and it was very hard to craft a story out of it. And we had thousands of note cards. David's mother's house and on the Upper West Side spread out all over the floor, and we were going through all the various interviews and all the scenes and all the things that they talked about. We were trying to find, you know, a story to complement the
beauty of it, because, you know, we knew the feeling of it before we even started shooting. We knew what the feeling of it was going to be, and it was going to be about this pursuit of perfection. But, you know, how are we going to make this sustain into a feature film? And, you know, again, I have to give a big, you know, thank you to Mizutani for his honesty, because he basically helps really frames the story. And to be honest, if we didn't have this interview piece, I don't know what we would have done to, you know, really show what the stakes are, because nobody else would be so honest.
It's two pieces. This is the setup right here. He asked the question. He says, will Yoshikazu ever be able to be better than his father in the eyes of the public? Because that's all that really matters.
Right.
難しいですよ。だから亡くなった時に大変だと思う。
There's really, you know, so much pressure on Yoshikazu. It's so hard because, you know, when the inevitable happens, as he says, you know, how, you know, is Yoshikazu going to be able to, you know, pull the same kind of, pull the clientele that he needs in order to sustain the restaurant, to continue to get the fish. And, you know, things aren't getting easier, you know, especially, you know, after the horrible earthquake that happened. You know, it's been even harder and harder to get fish, and the economy has gotten worse. Less and less people want to buy expensive sushi, so, you know, he really has an uphill battle. So not only does the sushi have to be twice as good as his father's in order for him to get that kind of recognition, the ingredients are getting worse and worse. So he really, you know, he has a really hard time. I mean, he's handling it beautifully, but, you know, it's definitely not easy.
I think that's the beauty of his character. I mean, his
yeah.
actual personality is everyone saying, I don't know if he's going to be able to do it. And he just, when his response is, I know it's going to be hard, but he also knows that this is what he's worked his whole life at. He has so much confidence towards it because he knows what he's doing, and he knows his position.
Yeah, and he's been by the side of his father for, you know, 30 years of, you know, working for his dad. And so while he may have been impatient while he's younger, he's just thankful for every day that he's able to continue to learn from his father. And, you know, up till now, you know, they're still working side by side in the restaurant. And, you know, on some days when Jiro isn't able to come in, you know, Yoshikazu runs the restaurant.
I think this is the first moment where you realize that there is a bit of scarcity, not only with, as you were talking about, the fish, but also about the practice of becoming a shokunin and really caring about your art form and going to the fish market every day so early in the morning just to get the best fish. Which Yoshi does, regardless of whether he feels good or bad.
Yeah, or if it's snowing outside. You know, we shot this movie over two. Basically, we shot 1 month in the winter and 1 month in the summer. So it was either extremely cold or it was extremely hot. This was a cold day. So shooting in the Tsukiji fish market was quite an adventure. You know, basically it involved, you know, there's quite a bit of doing to get access to the areas that we needed to. The outer market, like right where we're shooting right here, was, you know, not that difficult to get into and just required, you know, some basic permitting. But getting into the tuna auction itself, which you'll see in a few moments, required quite a bit of lobbying and, you know, winning them over, trying to win their trust, because there's been a lot of kind of negative press about the Japanese fishing industry and in other films as well, and so they're a bit apprehensive of a foreigner going in there and shooting it. So while the previous scene was shot in the wintertime, now this is the summer, and I was finally able to get permission to shoot in there. And so we kind of went all out, and I hired a Steadicam operator and just got these, you know, very cool shots of the fish, kind of these beasts of the deep that are so highly coveted. Sort of like, you know, I mean, these fish are sought after by everybody. And Fujita is the man, you know, he has the resources to get them because he has the absolute best clientele. But the first, the biggest sale of the entire season was actually made by a restaurant in Hong Kong. Bought the most expensive tuna ever, I think in excess of $100,000 for a single giant fish, you know, that weighed, you know, at least 100 pounds, you know, I think it was maybe 300 or 400 pounds, so, you know, I'm not exactly sure. But yeah, tuna is highly coveted. And so to prepare a single piece of tuna that Fujita's getting, you know, it can cost up to, you know, $50 to $75 just to serve a single piece of tuna. So they're, you know, they basically are losing money on the tuna.
The speed at which he looks at these tunas is so fast.
Yeah, he touches it.
He has such a sense for these fish. It's quite amazing. And a lot of these vendors, as you were saying, David, it's very hard to get in this market because of the nature of media, in the light of tuna and whatnot. That a lot of the other vendors would come up to the camera and be staring it down or straight up block it with their bodies.
This was an example of how, you know, what I was saying before, that nobody looked at the camera. In this case, everybody was watching me, and, you know, they were very kind of protective over, you know, they're protective over their industry. And also because, you know, there aren't that, you know, the tuna is declining and everybody knows it, and there's not really a whole lot, you know, this is their business and they have to keep going. So, you know, it's a very kind of difficult thing for them. This is one of my favorite sequences in the movie, and I think Brandon did an amazing job, you know, selecting the music here and using the bells, you know, because they ring the bells and there's bells in the music, and it's like very cool.
Yeah, this is one of the earlier scenes that was cut.
We knew how important it was.
And it just stayed the same, you know, with very few adjustments, because the energy of it is just always very important, kind of in the middle of the film, to show this different world it's very much the opposite of the sushi restaurant in terms of its quiet and calm. It's quite the opposite. And there we go, right into halibut. It's always a good cut.
So what you don't see here is a special technique that they do to keep the fish fresh. He'll chop the neck, and then we cut away before you see the next part, which is basically he takes a wire and sticks the wire down the spinal cord, and basically what he's doing is he's sealing the brainstem of the fish so that it continues its basic processes of respiration in the water, and its heart basically, it stays alive, but it's dead. So it doesn't struggle or move, but it continues to circulate up until they get it into the restaurant and start filleting it. So, the fish remains absolutely as fresh as possible up until the point that they fillet it. This is actually maybe my favorite shot in the movie. I remember watching and being like, oh my God, how is he gonna get this?
This is one of those takes that I've
This
seen.
octopus, if maybe he knows that he's gonna be massaged for an hour and not the good kind of massage.
メッティがやっぱりうちもある程度魚こだわって売っ
You
て
know,
るんで
the network of masters in the Tsukiji market, it's kind of like a family. They've all been working together for a very long time. They save their best stuff for Jiro and their other top customers because they know that they know that, you know, at Jiro's restaurant and some of the other top restaurants, that the fish is going to be utilized to its best potential. So they're going to go through all the trouble of getting the absolute best halibut and the absolute best octopus. They want to know that the flavors are going to come through, and that gives them great satisfaction to know that their craft is going to be delivered to the customer in the best possible way. So the kind of shrimp that they buy is actually a rare shrimp. It looks like kind of like a tiger shrimp, but in fact they're called wheel shrimp. They're incredibly rare and incredibly delicious, and definitely the most expensive shrimp that anybody will ever buy.
Are they also called car shrimp?
Yeah, car or wheel shrimp.
Car shrimp because of the size, right?
Yep.
Very large.
Mm-hmm. But actually, you know, because it's called car shrimp, then it's also called wheel shrimp because they kind of curl up into kind of a wheel shape. So I think that, you know.
It's one of those reoccurring messages. It's not about the money. That's something that they're very pretty much everyone in every interview said. And we chose this moment because it was an appropriate moment in the context of the story. But every vendor and every sushi chef in the film reaffirmed that it's not about the money, it's about the craft. And I think the thing that really shows that to me is the 10 seats in his restaurant. It's
and he doesn't expand. You know, there are other, like, for example, Cube, which is another amazing sushi restaurant. They have it's a 3-story building, you know, and he's trying to open other locations and things like that. But, you know, Jiro and Yoshikazu, they're not entrepreneurs so much as they are artists. And, you know, they
quality control.
Yeah, because they just want, they don't want anything associated with their name that isn't of the absolute best quality. And also just to add, when they're saying it's not just about the money, they're saying that they're having trouble finding young people that can work for them, that have the patience to do it. Oh yeah, this is part of Yoshikazu's journey, as we were saying before, that he's sort of the reluctant hero. And I wonder if it's sort of backlash from his father not being around when he was little, that he was saying, I don't want to be a sushi chef, I want to be a race car driver. And do you think subconsciously maybe it was just to frustrate his dad? I don't know.
And that's why I consider him the protagonist. This is such a great protagonist. Someone who wanted to be a race car driver and he couldn't because of his vision, and then he fell back and turned into like the best of his trade. It's really a beautiful, beautiful.
It's absolutely the hero's journey because, it isn't something that he wanted to do, but he had to do because he's the only one that can. You know, he and his brother are the only ones that can continue his father's tradition. Because if everything that his father did, were to be lost, that would just be, it'd be such a tragedy. And that's, it's what he's been called upon to do. And as you see as the film unfolds, he addresses this challenge and triumphs. Shooting on the bicycles was a little bit difficult. So unfortunately, we don't have all the bicycle scenes that I wanted.
David was riding a bicycle with a Canon SLR in the front or back of it.
I would attach it to various places, but
it was
while we were dodging traffic, and it was just too difficult. So some of the best biking stuff is just not me on the bicycle. This is shooting out of a car window here. And then we had a little kind of a rickshaw actually that I was seated on with the camera. And then our Steadicam operator would pull me on the rickshaw so I could get the profile shots of Yoshikazu riding the bicycle. And again, it's hard to find young people who have the patience to take 10 years. I mean, it's the same amount of time that you would train to be a doctor.
That's true.
And I'd say they really all have doctorates in sushi. In fact, I think maybe the moment that I knew I wanted to make the film was when I first saw those cargo doors open. It was before I was shooting the film. When I first went there. And I went to they took me to the fish market just to look around. And when those cargo doors opened, I was like, oh, wow. So one of my favorite things about shooting this was that every morning I would have breakfast with them, and then I would just put the camera down on the table. We would just eat and hang out, and they would kind of just talk about their dreams about being sushi chefs.
Sometimes I feel like you were destined to be a sushi chef, David. You turned into a filmmaker instead.
Well, I want to be a film shokunin, which is, you know, kind of a craftsman. I just want to be like, do what they do, only, you know, with movies. I love how everybody says that they're nervous when they're eating there.
This is kind of the first moment you get to relax and really take in the process of the prep work that they go through before the sushi hits the plate.
We use the metaphor for music a lot in this. And this is sort of like as Yamamoto describes it, as a symphony
A concerto.
or an orchestra, and Jiro is the conductor. And so Brandon worked hard to edit this in such a way that you can kind of see them almost as if they're playing their instruments.
The music evolves and brings in various elements at various points. Right now, we have an extra added violin, so I tried to bring in a new character, being it a new fish or new process of the prep. And it also gave a very nice moment of breath from people who don't speak Japanese and were reading subtitles for quite a while.
There's a lot of information, so it's nice to just kind of watch.
It's hypnotizing, really. And there we have 50 minutes of this.
That octopus never gets a break.
Hence the clock. And this is the first song that we edited this montage to, and it remains the song in the film. We're very happy with this piece. It's got a great evolution, and it really shows the process of, from beginning to end, the eel and the various other fish that are on the screen here. Which the eel is just absolutely gorgeous.
Those are some of my favorite shots.
And here we have one of coming up. One of very few. This is like practically the only VFX shot in the movie, but it provides a nice climax.
This was using a telescope tripod instead of, I could have gotten an expensive motion control rig, but we figured out actually I learned this on YouTube.
A telescope to see stars.
A telescope made to see stars, and it has a motorized tripod, so I just attached my camera and kind of programmed the tripod to do what I wanted to do instead of looking at stars. And it gives a very slow motion that I can then speed up, and then we layered it, in the VFX.
Like motion control. And this is probably, I think, one of the most emotional scenes in the film. Yeah. And this is where we have the true grit of what it becomes to, or what it takes to become a master.
And this is actually kind of counterintuitive because a lot of people kind of don't really respect the egg sushi, the tamago, but the final test, if you can be a shokunin at Jiro's, is to make the egg properly. And it's the hardest thing that they do. I mean, you can see, and it has to look absolutely perfect.
This is something that's interesting. This shot of him actually messing up the shot of the egg sushi, the tamago. This is from the very first shoot of when David went to Japan. This shot right here.
This is from 2 years earlier, and you can tell because he's wearing glasses and he's switched to contact since then. And I wonder if he'll ever forgive me for including that shot in there. But he's a great sport, and he was great in the film. And he's going to be an amazing sushi chef. So this egg dish, the tamago yaki, you see it in some American sushi restaurants have imitated this. I've seen it at Morimoto, and I've seen it at Yasuda in New York. And they call it castera, which is sort of like custard. It's like it's kind of a sweeter egg, and they use shrimp in it as well. Incredibly delicious. It's sort of like the dessert for the meal almost.
For me, that's what the movie was about in so many senses. In the editing, I also tried to make the editing very simple and use a lot of direct cuts and not a lot of fast edits, and try to make the editing emulate the sushi that Jiro was serving. It's pure simplicity. It doesn't need to be anything more than it is. Same thing with the story, too.
In all of the departments, it was all about that. It's just about simple elegance.
If it's unnecessary, if it doesn't make it better, cut it out.
So this was shot on a Saturday afternoon. Towards the end of the week, when they know that they're going to have leftover fish, they let Nakazawa, who is the senior apprentice, he's been there for 12 years, they let him, practice making the nigiri, and they just really train him, because he's saving up to start his own restaurant. So something that, a lot of people, you can't really tell necessarily from the film, but Jiro sushi is very lightly packed. The rice has space in it to allow air to, circulate within it. So when you bite into it, the flavor of the air inside the rice is flavored. This is actually for me, is the funniest part of the movie when he says, the wasabi makes him cry. I remember when I was little, I was scared of wasabi. First time I went to Japan, I was 2 years old. My parents would feed me cucumber rolls, but they would make sure there was no wasabi because I had no wasabi tolerance. Now I love it.
It's actually interesting there's no wasabi given to you as a customer on the plate. It's just the ginger, implying that there's the correct amount of wasabi already placed in the fish.
Yeah.
And in America, you always get wasabi.
Yeah. And also the big difference about wasabi at elegant restaurants is actually they use the root, and they actually they grind the root right in front of you. And so one of the biggest myths is that, and I see a lot of people in sushi restaurants, they're putting the wasabi into the soy sauce, and that would be, it would actually be offensive to a lot of the top sushi chefs because they put a lot of work into getting the best wasabi, and when you put it in the soy sauce, it negates the flavor of the wasabi, and it also, when you apply it to your sushi, beyond what it's supposed to be there. Yeah, it just kind of ruins the balance. So yeah, don't put your wasabi in the soy sauce.
Trust your sushi chef.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the actually this is kohata shinko that he's preparing, which is it's a seasonal younger version of the kohata, specifically I believe for the springtime, and each piece of that requires 3 fish. 2 to 3 fish on a single piece of sushi. So you saw he went through the process of, basically gutting each one of those fish. So it's an incredible amount of work put into just one delicious bite. Those are fried oysters that a customer gave them.
You actually ate some, right?
I did, yeah.
How are they?
They're really good. I love that it's actually kind of a style. You see this at the Tsukiji market and some of the food stalls. They have they serve these fried oysters with a really kind of delicious little barbecue sauce. It's good for breakfast. Some of the things that you eat for breakfast in Japan, you just would not imagine eating, I mean, Yamamoto told me that Jiro's favorite thing for breakfast when he would go to the fish market was a big tonkatsu. It's like a fried pork chop, basically, for breakfast. And Joel Robuchon is really Jiro's hero. Just incredible sensitivity, and I mean, his food is absolutely delicious. I was able to eat at his restaurant in Tokyo, and it was incredible.
I always found that really interesting. It's like you can never really tell who's got a better sense of taste. But to Jiro, he's got the best ever. Joel Robuchon is the best taste buds ever.
Well, Joel Robuchon, again, he's been declared, by many magazines and, publications as the greatest sushi chef of the... I'm sorry, not the greatest sushi chef, the greatest chef, period, the most important chef of the 20th century. He basically invented mashed potatoes as we know it, I've been told.
何も知らないのだと詐欺になっちゃうけど
Here's our rice dealer, who's kind of our comic relief. We found this scene way late in the editing process. Originally, we weren't going to have him in the film at all, but we found this pretty much 1 minute take that describes his character and rice and the process of choosing the rice, and an amazing moment where he's just so humbled in front of Jiro right here.
Only Jiro knows how to cook it. You know, rice is so often overlooked by, sushi restaurants. From Jiro's perspective, the rice is just as important as the fish. And it's all about the balance between the fish and the rice. So getting the right rice, making it in the right conditions, as you'll see in a moment, is just incredibly important. Serving the rice at the right temperature and the fish at the right temperature.
And they use a very different kind of rice than most sushi restaurants.
But the difference, which is huge to them, to a normal person would not, be that easy to detect. In fact, Jiro told me that Hiromichi, when he he can reach into a bag of rice and immediately tell where the rice is from just from touching it.
This was always one of my favorite parts, is seeing this assistant put his top on, followed by them. You think that's it? Nope. Here comes a massive pot with the wood thing made specifically to go on top of the lid.
So they're using it's called a hagama. It's a cauldron. And as you can see, the reinforced ring around it prevents the metal from expanding. So you can really keep the pressure on the rice, and that's what makes it so fluffy. It's fluffy and soft, and light and airy, but every single grain retains its own individual texture and kind of personality. So the rice is both unified and the individual grains are identifiable. It's kind of amazing when you eat it. And this is so important. And if there's one thing that sushi chefs around the world, watching this movie, God willing, they're watching this movie, can serve their rice just a little bit warmer, because it's the cold rice. I mean, after you have sushi at a place like Jiro's and you have this, incredible warm rice, it's so delicious. And I wish that more sushi chefs would make their rice warm, just body temperature. It's interesting. They have, you think they only make sushi, but actually, they have at least, 100 different types of fish and variants that they can, make sushi out of, and each one of them has their own process of preparation. So there's actually a lot of recipes.
One of my favorite moments. We held long on this shot to make you feel uncomfortable in case you're not picking that piece of sushi up right when you should.
Yeah.
Eat it right away. And the explanation of umami, which had so many people
giving different explanations of it.
And in tongue twisters, too, because it's a very hard thing to describe. There's no direct translation.
But Yoshikazu finally, breaks it down perfectly. It's just about the satisfaction.
Emotion.
And the balance is only there to create the satisfaction of eating it. It's just about making it feel good when you're eating it. This is one of our favorite shots in the movie.
Mm-hmm. This is umami.
She's experiencing the umami.
美味しいお寿司の基本っていうのはね、シャリと上のネタの一体感、これが合わないと。
And that's quite literally what umami is. If I'm not mistaken, it's the balance of amino acids.
Oh, sure. It's the space in between the flavors. It's just that balance. You really taste the purest essence of the fish. And eating there, it's absolutely incredible. You really, you've never, you really just, what is the essence of a snapper? What is the essence of a tuna? And you taste these things. And it makes it hard to eat sushi at other restaurants. So it's debated that Jiro actually created the modern omakase. Omakase meaning, the chef's choice menu. And that he kind of innovated this idea of serving only sushi in a specific order to heighten the flavors that are there. And this has been imitated around the world.
And there was a great line about, it was very inspirational to both of us as the filmmakers. Jiro's omakase course is like a concerto, and it very much influenced the music of the film. And of course, we love to use classical music from the beginning, but when that line, we heard it, it just made so much sense.
Yamamoto loves classical music, and yeah, I mean, his metaphors, we really, the movie is really kind of a synthesis of both Jiro's perspective and Yamamoto's perspective, from both the sushi master and the sushi lover, because Jiro is the absolute best at making sushi, and Yamamoto is the best at eating sushi. So something you'll notice here, and this is something that Yamamoto told me the first time I went to the restaurant with him before I was shooting it, is that the sushi has a soft landing. And you'll notice that when he puts the pieces down, they kind of settle into place. And this is because of the light packing of the rice. The rice is, just dense enough, it holds its shape, but it isn't, it just melts, the whole thing just melts in your mouth in this beautiful way.
Here comes...
This is the best soft landing right here.
The motion of that is just gorgeous.
And it makes me hungry. What's interesting is that when you order, you can't go to a sushi restaurant and just order yellowtail. They'll be like, okay, what kind of yellowtail?
Right.
We have very simple definitions for the fish, but yellowtail to them is a whole category. There are 30 different varieties. I love the structure, not only is it it's the same as any kind of story, 3 acts.
It's a classic story.
Sure. And it begins with, some standards, then it goes, it kind of turns that world upside down, and then the 3rd act is sort of the synthesis of the 2. Yamamoto told me that it's like eating jewelry. That you almost feel bad that this is going to go away, but it's so satisfying to eat. You feel kind of a little evil when you're eating it.
That's actually an interesting one, the gourd roll. That's rarely seen in the U.S.
Kampyo maki. It's because it's kind of crunchy. So an interesting thing to note about Japanese conversation is that when a person is speaking, it's always polite you make a vocal sound of acknowledgement. And you'll notice here that whenever Jiro says something, the more reverence to the person, the louder the response to the words that he's saying. So you'll hear them acknowledge him in kind of an interesting way. During interviews, especially when I was having Yamamoto or I was had the help of my translators interview them, they would always, in deference to them, wanted to make, a noise of response like an mm-hmm or an aha, but, we couldn't do it because we didn't want to pick up their voice in the sound. So, before and after the interview, we would apologize for our rudeness.
There's a lot of editing around acknowledging emotional vocal noises.
生涯で最近が一番お寿司握るのが多いんだよ。みんなお飲みになったつまみ食べますでしょ。と最後に握りっていうのは4つか5つぐらいしかない。ああ、そういうことありますよね。今も私の最初からやってますから20個ぐらい。ミシュランの三つ星で最年長シェフっていうんで。またかっこいいですねそれ。ギネスブックに登録されてる。
A lot of people ask if it's a nervous experience, and really, it's as nervous as you make it. The reason he's not talking to you is because he's focused.
Exactly, because he's trying to, that's you sit in a quiet room and you hear the sound of the fountain and you just eat the sushi.
An artist painting a picture isn't talking to you while they're painting it.
Exactly. He wouldn't want to distract you, because then if you were talking to him while you were chewing or something, it would diminish the taste.
俺は握っててもね、誰に出てもさあどうだっていうような
感覚になりますこっち。
But once he's finished making the sushi, you know, he can take a breath. And, you know, he has a great sense of humor.
それ終わるまではもう俺は自分の思う
It's
通り
like
に。
seeing Jiro acknowledge victory in what he does because he's so hard on himself. Seeing him show any sign of happiness towards, you know, victory and doing what he does and saying he does it well is a breath of fresh air for me because he's so strict on himself in every conversation, throughout every interview, just always trying to be better.
Yeah, but, you know, he at the end of the meal when his customers are happy, the energy from the customers, you know, it makes him very happy. You know, he can feel that energy of satisfaction, and that satisfies him. So this is kind of the description of this, kind of the uphill battle, because they you know, are constantly trying to make better and better sushi, but at the same time, it's harder and harder to get good ingredients. We love the stock footage, yeah.
Yeah, this is something that we always had a hard time finding the place for in the film because we had to acknowledge the scarcity and that, you know, fish disappearing in the world is a large problem in general. But to place it early in the film, it would feel like that was what the movie is about. We decided to place it right after the climax, the Sushi Concerto, where you see every single fish placed down perfectly to passing Jiro's inspection. You really feel that there may be the loss of this wonderful thing that is existing today. And will it exist next year, the year after? I don't know. But the movie is not about fish disappearing. It's about the beauty of the art. We felt that right after that Sushi Concerto, where you really understand everything about what's gone into it, showing you that, you know, this is something that needs to be maintained in order for more generations to enjoy was pretty much the perfect timing for it.
Just set up the stakes and then show, you know, I mean, the stakes are there. This is a beautiful thing, and it's in danger. And we also, you know, include in the film not only as it's our responsibility, but also, you know, something that Jiro and Yoshikazu are very concerned about. You know, there's no easy answer for the situation because, you know, I mean, nobody knew that sushi would become this popular, you know, and they've been doing the same thing, and do they have to change how are they going to, you know, adjust their craft to deal with what the rest of the world is doing?
To them, it's like removing tuna from the world. It's like removing the paintbrush from an artist's hand.
It's as if the color blue were to go extinct. Or another, whatever your favorite color is. So I was very lucky, you know, and to be able to come on this trip with Jiro. You know, they did so much to help me with the movie and to allow me, you know, to come out with them, and, you know, because we realized, you know, the whole movie is taking place in a sushi restaurant, and I really wanted to just see more of Jiro's life. And, you know, he was just so generous with his time and his energy. I'm just so incredibly grateful. This is the most beautiful restaurant I think I've ever been in. The view was incredible, and I wish that I could have gotten there in advance to put neutral density filter on the window so you could see out the window better, because the exposure between the inside and the outside of the restaurant is so different. But it's just incredibly beautiful, and we're looking over a river, and this is actually the very river that Jiro's father gave the tours on. This is, you know, his childhood home. And the lady that greeted him when he first entered the restaurant, the two of them worked together in the first restaurant that Jiro ever worked at. And so, you know, he's kind of a home, you know, he's a real hero around here.
お前誰も入ってない黙って入ってて叱られてお前分かる手叩くやつあるかも。お寺じゃ手叩くんだよ。
As someone points out somewhere in the footage, it's very rare that they smile or laugh when they're making sushi. So it's nice to see them out of their environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, incredibly serious when they're making sushi, but Jiro has a great sense of humor. So this is kind of their ancestral graveyard. And, you know, this is part of the tour. Basically, you know, Jiro and Yoshikazu kind of arranged a series of events for me to, you know, to witness and film. And, you know, again, I'm incredibly moved that they allowed me to, you know, come to kind of a sensitive place like this. Although Jiro can seem kind of irreverent.
大体あんまりお世話になってないから来る気ない。
大丈夫、罰が墓の前でそんなこと言って罰がだよ。
Editing this movie, like that was one of the messages that really resonated for me. Is for Jiro, he had a really hard time growing up, you know, and he made himself the best that he could be. He hasn't stopped, he won't stop, he doesn't want to. And I felt for me, editing the movie, I needed, like, I worked night and day on this thing for forever, and I felt like I needed that inspired me to make it as good as I possibly could and to keep on working on it even when I was tired. It's just so inspirational to any artist.
This is a great lesson, you know, the thing that he's talking about here about how, you know, just following orders and, you know, being a little bit of a rebel is actually okay. And actually this is kind of counterintuitive to traditional Japanese wisdom. You know, in Japan they say, there's a saying, the nail that sticks out must be hammered down. And what Jiro did with sushi, you know, started making sushi his own way. And, you know, maybe his masters may have frowned on him, but it's the only way that there's progress in the world is you have to take a risk. This is a series of some of my favorite shots in Japan. These are wishes that are from a shrine. They tie them into a knot and put them on a string. It's kind of the feeling of Tokyo is what we're trying to capture here.
テレビ見て今日も来たんだけどこの間見たってしてで食べたくなったから来たって言うんだけどもそうとこっち正面だからこっちで私が握るからお客さん一番満足してくれるんですよね。
This is the other thing. He's very aware.
Yeah.
Of how of customers that come in and where they're coming from these days, because most people have read about it beforehand.
And they want to come and they want to be served by the master. But to be, you know, to be frank, you know, I mean, Yoshikazu is so perfectly versed in Jiro's style, you know, while Yoshikazu sushi has its own kind of flair to it, you know, I mean, the tradition, you know, continues, and Jiro is he's a great teacher.
This is one of those moments where you really get a sense of who Jiro is in his most comfortable form. Talking to
Yamamoto is off camera, and then Yoshikazu's in the back, and then Nakazawa's there. And actually, I kind of like racking focus away here because we've had this tight close-up the whole time. Now we kind of see where we are.
And that Yoshi was listening the whole time.
Mm-hmm. You know, so much happens behind the scenes. You think the sushi chef is doing all the work right there, but it's really just the presentation.
And this is that mentality that really sticks with me.
He's so incredibly honest with himself.
He just keeps on, no matter what, he'd rather be nowhere else. And that's something interesting, you know, a lot of people say that his wife must be the best woman in the world to put up with that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and behind every great man, there's a great woman, and unfortunately, she wasn't. We weren't able to include her in the film. Not that we didn't want to, but you can consider, Jiro's kind of his balance and his, security and everything, has so much to do with her because, without a, a solid home life, it's very difficult to do good work. So she stays behind the scenes, but she was definitely a big factor in his life.
This is kind of our second aha moment. This is really, for us, what defined our entire story, especially the build of the second and third act up to this moment, where we find out that Yoshikazu was the one that made sushi for the Michelin inspectors that came by and gave them 3 stars. And as soon as I found this scene, just from watching the footage, and after it had first been translated, I was the first one to watch it. And I ran to David and said, "This is it. This is our moment. This is everything surrounds this."
Yeah, and after Brandon, after we watched the scene and we realized that this was kind of like this was the proof that the tradition has been passed on, and that Yoshikazu, he is up to the challenge and he has embraced the challenge and he is succeeding. I remember telling my grandparents were a big influence on the story because my grandparents are both in their 80s and they're writers and they keep on writing. They're writing their final volume of their book on Eugene O'Neill right now, the great playwright, and they never stop. And I remember I told them what the ending of the movie was going to be. My grandfather told me, that he had chills, and that was, one of the greatest validations I've ever had. And I knew that, this was going to be a full feature film.
And I'll never get sick of watching this last montage to this Philip Glass track. This is one of my favorite songs ever composed by Philip Glass, and I'm so happy to have it in the film.
Brandon and I were roommates. We were assigned as roommates freshman year of college. Randomly, about almost 10 years ago. And this was actually, there were a couple of songs in this movie that were on our freshman roommate playlist, and that the fact that we're able to include it in the film is just kind of magical. So this is my favorite scene of the movie.
This is one of those shots that was really hard to hold off from using until the very end because it's such a beautiful shot. Mm-hmm. There's so many beautiful shots in this end sequence that we prevented.
Yeah, we had to have the discipline to save it. I think this is actually my favorite shot in the movie. This tracking shot of Yoshikazu, I really love it. He's just going.
Not looking back. Mm-hmm. That's for sure. It's all about moving forward. This is kind of that.
Yeah, the idea here was that there are kind of 3 stages of the process. There's the buying of the fish, there's the preparation in the kitchen, and then there's the preparation that happens out in front of the customer. That's one of my other favorite shots.
Again, this is probably a sequence of all of our favorite shots.
I can keep on saying it's my favorite shot over and over again.
Because I tried to really save some of the best for last, and it was difficult. And this is kind of a reference back.
Kind of a recurring visual cue about
Yoshi's genius montage.
Mm-hmm.
And his new way of serving tamago.
Mm-hmm. This is Yoshikazu's creation.
And I love this. Them both inspecting it, just staring at the piece of sushi. First, Jiro in focus, then Yoshi.
Then walking into the future. This is the metaphor here. I sat in the car with Yoshikazu and I said, we need an ending for the film now. If there's one thing that you want to tell the audience,
really?
What is it? And then he said something, and then my translator was like, ask him again. And we did it 2 more times, and then we got this take, which is, just absolutely perfect.
Our parting moment, which we were so lucky to have.
Yeah, I sat in the subway with him, and as I was shooting it, I knew that this was going to be like, oh my God, like, do not shake the camera. Do not screw this moment up.
We you have it. Hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for watching, and you know, we think, you know, something that we've always thought about was how, you know, this was a movie, it's about sushi, but really sushi is the setting, and that the things that Jiro's talking about and things that Yoshikazu are talking about really just applies to absolutely everything, to any vocation whatsoever. You know, you really just, you know, look at what you're doing. Is this what you love to do? You know, and if it is, then just do your absolute best at it. And if you don't like what you're doing, then change something in your life and find something that you can really, you know, just focus on and continue to try to improve. And the satisfaction from that is, from doing what you love and doing your best is, has incredible value. And, you know, in the process of making the film, it really kind of changed our lives. And the way that we kind of approach our work, and the kind of the way you look at the work that you're doing, and just without fear, try to improve it. And, you know, so much has been deleted from the film that was really great, but just all in the name of making the film better. And so, you know, we hope that this comes across in the process of watching it.